Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 7 of season 2 of Arrow called The State vs. Queen. And guys, this is one of those episodes that just sort of, as you're watching it, and the full implications of everything that happened hit you. You just sort of just want to run around the room flailing your arms. You're just so freaking out. You know, this episode was like Stephen Amell on his Twitter teased that this episode was going to make the fans freak, and he was not kidding. Like, just the reactions I've seen from people on Twitter and Tumblr, it's just been... It really has been... This is a mind-blower. This is one of the best episodes of this series so far. I mean, it's great. Not without its flaws, but overall, it's a really, really great episode. Anyway, let's get into things. First of all, I definitely got a big kick out of the fact that it was actually Count Vertigo that turned the Dollmaker, that basically helped the Dollmaker bust out of jail. That was a really nice touch. You know, certainly nice to have a little bit of a nod to him, because obviously we're really not going to be able to see the Dollmaker anymore after this. And heck, I didn't expect to see him again after his first and last appearance, or so we thought. And another thing that I liked about this scene is just shows you like what a jerk the Count is. You know, he lets out this guy who's a serial killer. He's going around taunting the other inmates, you know, too ugly, too stupid, too ambitious. I mean, you know, Seth Grafton is just going to town with the Count. I mean, yeah, he's hamming it up like there's no tomorrow, and yeah, the Count has a lot of shades of Heath Ledger's version of the Joker. Well, so what? You know, a lot of characters have, you know, take a few pages out of some other character's book, and so long as they do it well, as long as they do their own thing well, what does it matter? I mean, really, exactly how many bad guys out there have been riffs on, like, Darth Vader? You know, how many creepy Nazi guys are a riff on that dude from Raiders of the Lost Ark? Man, that's a good movie. Love Raiders. Anyway, but getting into it. Did you guys notice that when the Count was busting out of jail, the hole that he escapes through is actually shaped like an arrow pointing down? I don't know why the guys behind the scenes did that, but for some reason I got an enormous kick out of it. Anyway, let's go on. First of all, a couple of nice little shout-outs in this episode. One was, we again hear, if you listen carefully, the nation of Markovia mentioned. This was mentioned at least twice last season, and I talked about how it's the fictional country in Europe, I believe supposedly located somewhere near the Czech Republic, where the heroes Geoforce and Terra are supposed to be from. Also, they mentioned that the deputy mayor's name is Levitz. This is a nod to Paul Levitz, who's one of the well-known editors over at DC Comics. Anyway, let's actually talk about the island first, just to get it out of the way. You know, first of all, I like that you know, Slade is a little bit more back on his game now. I guess those herbs Shadow did were enough to get him up on his feet and get him into shape enough that he's able to machine gun one of the Amazo's crew in the feet. You gotta love that Slade's a pragmatist when it comes to fighting. That was brutal, but that certainly was effective. And Shadow is quite the pragmatist herself. She held on to that bomb that they was going to use to blow up the plane, and used it to blow up some of the bad guys. And this, of course, ultimately is what led Professor Ivo to kill the captain of the Amazo. So scratch him off the list. Although, I'd really like to know exactly where it is that Shadow learned to disarm explosives in like less than 10 seconds using nothing more than a pocket knife. Where in the world do you learn to do that? Alright, having your dad be some sort of like Zen archery master does not teach you how to disarm bombs with a pocket knife. But, at the end of the day, this is a comic book show, so yeah. Anyway, so of course this also leads us to the situation where Sarah is going to be introduced to Shadow and Slade, and she's already earlier this season mentioned them. She's mentioned Shadow wearing the archer's hood, so exactly what their reaction to her is going to be is certainly going to be interesting. And poor Slade, you guys was like, oh wait, here's another chick that Oliver has slept with? Aw, man. Okay. Anyway, let's get right into things. So let's briefly talk about the trial, and well, once again, I have to say that this trial in so many ways is ridiculous. One, it seems to take at most 2 days. Seriously, this would be bigger than O.J. Simpson, and it takes 2 friggin' days. This is ridiculous. And of course, okay, after Adam Donner goes down because of the vertigo, Laurel is appointed head of the prosecution and gets the blessing of the district attorney to do this, despite the fact that she is prosecuting her ex-boyfriend's mother, someone who she personally knows and personally knew for years. It's like, you don't get to prosecute somebody whose house you used to hang out in. Ugh. I can grant TV a certain amount of leeway on this sort of thing. I mean, early in the first season, I complained endlessly about how Quentin Lance would not be allowed near any investigation involving the Queens. But this is absurd. Seriously. I mean, I understand what they're trying to do here. Of course, the drama of all of this, but it's just ridiculous. And this is, of course, supposed to be turning Laurel into some kind of emotional basket case. But instead of being, an emotionally devastating moment where she literally runs away from Oliver, it just seems silly. I mean, I almost laughed. Though I gotta say, though, Laurel has actually been like the one real character who hasn't quite sparked this season. Now, I'm sure that once she finds out that Sarah's still alive, that'll probably change. But it really feels like so far Laurel has not really been terribly well serviced this season. Apart from the thing where she set that trap for Oliver. That was cool. That was actually very cool. But anyway, now just kind of continuing on with the trial. I was like Oliver, is like, wait, she's not guilty? Like when they first announced it, it's like, okay, I can kind of see that, but there's no way she's not gonna she got off totally? What the heck? And I love that Oliver is smart enough to realize, like, no, this ain't right. Something's wrong here. And of course, the jury being back so soon is, again, like, ridiculous. But at least we're given a good explanation for this. And it's Malcolm Merlyn is still alive. Now, I'd read, and I don't read spoilers, I'm willing to read casting announcements, but I don't read spoilers. I don't consider casting announcements spoilers. That John Barrowman was going to be back this season. But it had been hinted that he was going to be kind of appearing in a flashback. And I was like, okay, that's cool. I did not expect this. I, honest to God, thought Malcolm Merlyn was for sure dead. Like when the driver starts taking Moira away, I'm like, it's gonna turn out that somebody's gonna like kill her. She's gonna be like assassinated. And Oliver's going to be like, just completely go off the rails, and it's going to be all about, like, can he hold on to the no killing thing and whatnot. Well, it might have been a little too late at that point, but whatever. So I totally thought Moira was like seconds away from being taken off to die or get killed. And then the driver says, well, I was instructed to bring you here. And then he immediately catches an arrow in the chest. I'm like, oh, it's the League of Assassins. Like, wait, why would the League of Assassins shoot him with it? Oh my god! And literally, I'm thinking, no way, no way, no way. As they're turning the camera around, and it's John Barrowman. It's like, yeah. And then he kind of starts going in on Moira, and it's like, Thea is my daughter. I'm like, oh, oh god, people, this season is gonna be so good. It's gonna be so good. It's gonna be awesome. And we're only 7 episodes in. We're like barely a third of the way in. Oh god, other TV shows out there, I hope you are watching this and Sleepy Hollow and taking notes, cause this is how you do television. Oh man, I cannot tell you folks how long it has been since I had a show where I was so excited to tune in every week. I really can't. I think like maybe the first season of Veronica Mars probably, or the later seasons of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I love Deep Space Nine, but oh man, it's all so good. Anyway, let me see here. Well, okay, we also get the revelation, of course, that Moira and Malcolm were lovers. Now Moira tries to pass it off as a brief fling. But, you know, one of the things I talked about more than once when I was reviewing last season is how it seemed like Malcolm had a little bit of a thing for Moira. Well, here we learn that there was a lot more than a little bit of a thing. And, of course, suddenly it all makes so much more sense as to why Malcolm was completely blind to what Moira was doing behind his back. Malcolm obviously had some real feelings for her, and those blinded him to what she was doing. But now the blinders are off. Malcolm knows that Thea is his daughter, and oh god, does it suck to be Moira Queen right now. Now, why she was willing to go to prison for the rest of her life to keep this under wraps makes sense. Because there's nothing Moira Queen would not do for her kids. And of course, the implications for Thea are just mind-blowing. If it is ultimately her destiny to become Speedy, Green Arrow's sidekick, well, right here is some serious motivation for why she would do that. And by if I mean when, she ultimately learns the truth of all of this. It's very Luke Skywalker. And as is the thing of two people kind of having a bit of a sexual attraction to each other, and then us later discovering that in the next big thing that they're actually siblings. Wait, was it Empire Strikes Back where we found out that was Leia and Luke were siblings? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Empire Strikes Back. And most of the good stuff in the original trilogy was in Empire anyway. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'll pretty much take any opportunity I can to talk about Star Wars. If you watch my videos, you've probably figured this out, because I love me some Star Wars. Anyway, let's kind of move on and talk about what's going on with the other characters. Not a whole lot to say about Diggle this episode. Just as soon as he mentioned, that he'd gotten a flu shot, I'm like, got it. I know what the Count did, because he wouldn't bring that up if it wasn't somehow relevant to the plot. And the idea of a supervillain going around and spiking flu shots? That's comic book genius right there. That's exactly what the really cool, smart supervillains in comics do. They do stuff just like that. You know a villain is smart when you go, man, that's a really, really good idea. Anyway, speaking of good ideas, you know what wasn't a good idea? Pretty much everything that Felicity did. I love how she says repeatedly this episode, don't you guys, basically some variation of, don't you guys know how smart I am? And then she goes off and breaks into the flu thing, despite knowing that she sucks at field work, knowing that this thing is probably being fiddled with by a psychotic drug dealer. and while wearing her Queen Consolidated ID badge the entire time. I mean, that's basically the big clue the Count needs to figure out that Oliver is the vigilante. And even worse, she knows somebody who is at least two other people who are much more qualified to deal with this. Now, granted, I can understand why she would not tell Oliver. She would do this instead of putting it on Oliver's shoulders, because Oliver's got a lot on his plate at the moment. But for God's sakes, lady, call Quentin Lance. Alright? He's much more qualified to go and handle this. In fact, call Roy. Because if you've been paying attention to the Blood Rush, that's the little webisodes for Arrow that they've been putting out, you actually see Felicity, as part of the story, guiding Roy via an earpiece in a mission to perform breaking and entering on a medical facility. And yeah, I mean, it's just like, God, Felicity, this is the stupidest thing you have ever done on this show. But of course, this has to happen so that Oliver can rescue Felicity, kill the Count, break his whole thing about no killing, and of course, give us that really wonderful little moment for the Felicity fans out there. And what I like about that moment, I mean, obviously, yeah, feelings! To quote more people than I can count on Tumblr. It shows us that, well, Oliver has taken that vow to kill, and he does take it seriously. He's not going to take it so seriously that he will allow people to be hurt. It's sort of like how police officers don't go around looking to blow people away. I mean, we're not action movie characters. But police officers and soldiers and people like that, they're trained to, if they have to kill someone, if lethal force is the only option to preserve another person's life or their own, then they will employ that force without hesitation and with as much effectiveness as possible. And putting 3 arrows in his chest and having him fall out a skyscraper, well, that's more than enough to put the Count down for the count. And you have to think that even though Oliver made this oath, if Tommy was there and saw the situation, do you really think he'd hold it against Oliver using that force? Do you think he'd hold that against a police officer or someone like that? If it had been Diggle there, do you think he'd have held it against Diggle for killing the Count to save Felicity? No. Tommy would have understood that in that circumstance, Oliver would have had no choice but to kill the Count. What Tommy had the problem with was Oliver going out and tracking down people specifically so that he could kill them. I mean, that's a pretty good definition of premeditated murder. Now, granted, they were generally bad people. They were, Oliver was acting as a vigilante. But Tommy wasn't wrong when he called Oliver a murderer. It's all a matter of perspective. And anyway, oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention about the island is they talk about the Japanese submarine. Now, do you remember when Oliver last season was impersonating one of Eddie Fryer's goons? Fryers got suspicious of him and asked him, "Did you come in on the submarine?" And Oliver senses that this is a trap and he says, "No, I came in on the plane." Now, maybe it's a coincidence, but sure would be strange if Eddie Fryers didn't know about the submarine. Doesn't that shine a bit of a different perspective on what was going on last season? Maybe Eddie was up to more than just trying to shoot down that Chinese airliner and whatnot. And then we, of course, come to our little segment with Brother Blood, who is, of course, basically the guy who was bankrolling the Count. And at the end, he gets this message, hey, come down here and check out this guy. And somebody has survived the drug, that crazy drug that they were injected with. And he refers to him as Brother Cyrus. Well, okay, we've already had a guy on the show named Cyrus Vatch, but he's dead, and he ain't coming back. But, and I even mentioned this at the time, there's another character in the DC universe who's well known and for having his real name be Cyrus, and that is Cyrus Gold, aka Solomon Grundy. He of Solomon Grundy won't pants too fame. Basically, if you're not familiar with him, he's sort of a super zombie. And an intelligent super zombie is basically a fairly good way of describing Solomon Grundy. He was on the old Super Friends cartoon. He was on Justice League cartoon from about 10 years ago. And if I remember correctly, he appeared in the video game recently, Injustice: Gods Among Us, the big DC superhero fighting game that just came out and apparently did pretty well for itself. So obviously, we're going to be getting a rather different interpretation of Solomon Grundy here, but I've got a bit of a soft spot for Solomon Grundy simply because he had a nice storyline in the 90s Starman comics, of which I was and still am an enormous fan. Those were some fantastic comics, and if you're looking for some good comic book reading, go and track down the collections of James Robinson's Starman. It is an absolutely beautiful story. And just looking at my notes here real quick, that covers everything that I had to say, guys. Again, this is such a good episode, and my mind is just abuzz with the possibilities for all the cool things that are coming down, that are possible, and that I know from the casting announcements and the episode descriptions and whatnot, and things that have been officially announced. Oh, this is going to be such good TV. I'm so looking forward to it. Anyway, guys, I'm going to have to call it here before I just explode from pure geek happiness. Anyway, that's all I have for you this time. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and of course you can follow me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.